Welcome to SALTovation. The SALTovation Show is a podcast series featuring the leading voices in SALT, where we talk about the issues and strategies to help you make sense of state and local tax. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SALTovation podcast. Today, we continue our Meet the Team series with director Stacey Roberts. Hi, Stacey. Do you think we'll be able to stay focused today? My guess is maybe.
That's a strong maybe.
And the SALTovation boss lady, Judy Vorndran. Hi, Judy.
Hello.
All right, Stace. So we're both Illinois girls, power to the Midwest.
We are.
You started your career in Chicago and then headed towards the Pacific Northwest and then settled in Denver. What do you think you learned about working in each of those markets?
So I worked for Anderson, and the Chicago office was the headquarters of Anderson. So it was a huge...
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was a huge office building. I mean, we had a whole office building and tons of people, right? And I'm from a little town in Illinois, a little farm town. And so when I moved to Chicago, just that alone was like a big culture shock for me. But in the end, one of the best things I ever did for myself, just personally. And so then going into the building, 33 West Monroe, still remember.
It's burned.
Don't know.
You'll never forget.
I don't know what's in there now. It could be the new Anderson. I don't know, because Anderson's back in another shape or form, right? But I would go into 33 West Monroe and with thousands of other people. And the SALT group, the state and local tax group, was I think around 100 to 125 people.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
The team was further broken down into various service lines. So I was part of the income tax group. There were people that were part of the sales tax group. There were people that were part of the property tax group, and there were people that were part of the payroll tax group. So at that time, Anderson did all of those, services for state and local tax. So having been part of that, I worked for, I would say, some of the really very technically oriented income tax partners. Probably learned the most, honestly, from them from a technical perspective. Not to get too nerdy about Illinois income tax, but it can be pretty complicated. So I did a lot of corporate tax work. The group itself was consultative. So we didn't do compliance, so there was a separate group that did compliance, but we always reviewed it. So here I was as a staff person reviewing state income tax returns that other people prepared. And then I was having to work with this other group that was the compliance group in order to get changes made and the returns out the door. So very well-oiled process as far as that was concerned. But from a consulting standpoint, I learned so much from the partners because they really challenged us to learn the law, to understand the nuances with the Illinois law as opposed to maybe a California, because so much of what Illinois' unitary rules are related to are very much related to California's unitary rules, but in some ways somewhat different. So we would have quizzes. We'd have to do these income tax meetings really early in the morning, right? And when you're, in your 20s and going out in Chicago and then having to go to work the next day and early at 7:30 having a quiz from one of the partners. It's kind of brutal. But at the end, I learned a ton. And I learned, I would say, a lot about just kind of hierarchy and some things that I didn't like, honestly, right? Because I remember distinctly, I had written, and this was, I had made senior, and I had written a private letter ruling for the state of Rhode Island, of all places. And it was arguing distortion for apportionment. And I remember walking into pretty much the head technical partner of the income tax group, his office. And this is the days, right, where these partners still wanted things printed, right? So you're not emailing it to them, right? I've been doing this a long time. So I'm physically taking in this PLR and he's just sitting there in his office waiting for me to bring it in. And he grabs his red pen to get ready to make edits. And he did. And he's a lefty. So it was over the, this kind of, edits all over my paper. So, hard, very, like, I was really nervous walking in, right? Because it's all these, it's a big group. It's, you're expected to do a lot. You're expected to know a lot.
You're like 23, 24.
Correct. And, a little intimidated by these people, right? But it really was like a really good learning ground for me to become so technically competent, I think, in the income tax area. But then I also had like the blinders because I didn't know sales tax. I didn't know property tax. I didn't know payroll tax because there were other people that knew that stuff and I didn't have to know it. And so then when, for personal reasons, I decided to move, logistics or geographically rather, I had to learn and become more of a generalist, right? Because Anderson's office in Chicago, again, the biggest office, the headquarters office, then I'm moving to other offices that are smaller. And I also learned that at these firms, I don't know why I would ever have thought this, but I also learned that these offices, the culture is very different, even though you're part of the same firm. Mm-hmm. And so that was really interesting to me too, to go from that Chicago office, which I felt was, I had a lot of support and I learned a lot, but then when I got to these other offices it was just different. And culturally, I was very surprised at how different it really was. That was an eye-opener. Then, like I said, I had to really kind of learn, like sales tax, for example. I just had to learn it because if I was going to help my clients, I had to figure it out. So it was kind of sink or swim a little bit, but I would say moving to those other geographies exposed me to, a broader base. Also just different clients. Surprisingly, this probably isn't a surprise to you, Meredith, but like Chicago's pretty middle market. There's some big companies, don't get me wrong. Like, I worked on Walgreens, for example. It's a huge company, right? I worked on a giant project for them, right? But, there's a lot of middle market companies. And so when I moved to, Portland, when I moved to Denver here, a lot of middle market companies, right? So from that perspective, it wasn't that different. I will say, in those other markets, I was also still working on, SEC, companies. So I was having to do work that I had been doing similar work, when I was in Chicago. And I always got my in with these clients through the income tax just because that was what I knew. But I would say, like I said earlier, that for me, moving to the smaller markets forced me to become more of a generalist and learn sales tax, which has been invaluable to me over time.
Well, so then you said you went to Portland, you went to Portland from Chicago. And then did you kind of do like Oregon and Washington kind of together?
More Oregon, I would say. Yeah. So fast forward, and so Anderson went down. No surprise, right? That's not news.
Spoiler alert.
That's not news. And I went down with that ship, and then I ended up at KPMG, where you worked, Meredith. So what was interesting about that too? So I was in Portland when that happened. I barely got my moving expenses reimbursed from moving to Portland. The firm was indicted. I think I moved February, and the firm was indicted in April or May. Actually, probably April, because then I became a KPMG employee early May. And all of the Portland and Seattle office people for Anderson became KPMG employees. They took over the audit and tax work for those markets. And so we were the bigger practice. And so we were all kind of, I hate to say miserless company, but, we were all in it together. And so there was some comfort in that, right? Because I'd made friends with these people. Honestly, I hadn't been there very long to, get to know a lot of the people clearly, because I'd moved in February and then everything happened, a couple months later. But I got to know them. They got to know, kind of my expertise, how I worked. And we were all kind of in it together and figuring it out, right? And so when we all joined KPMG, yeah, sure, different firm, culturally a little different, but we were still all like kind of the Anderson people together. And so it didn't really feel that different. And we continued working on the same clients. So that was kind of interesting, right? It was just, they just basically slapped the KPMG name on the door. I was going into the same office space. I sat at the same desk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, like one day I'm like giving my resignation at Anderson, and then the next day I go to offsite training all day with everybody else. And then the next day I walk into my same office and sit at my same desk. So it's just very interesting, a very interesting time. Yeah.
And changing your emails and all that. I mean, like in the day, all the emails just become at KPMG. Wow.
Yeah.
Because I when I was at Deloitte, we acquired the Anderson practice in Chicago. Yeah, so I actually went to the Christmas party there because I was working with a group that was in Oak Park. Is that right? Oak Park or Oak? Okay, so our group was
probably Oak Brook.
Oak Brook. Maybe it was in Oak Brook. Yes.
Yeah.
There was
the
an
sales
office.
Tax.
Correct.
Right, sales tax people,
which was away from downtown Chicago, but we got to go to the Chicago party, which was at the Natural History Museum. And I mean, I don't know if there were 10,000 people. I mean, I had no idea there was that big an office, and Denver is so small comparatively. But I worked nationally, right? So I got to see all these different offices at Deloitte, but we had taken over the Anderson practice in Illinois. So I was with your old brethren and then you're at KPMG because that's what happened with KPMG, took over the Anderson practice in different markets because Deloitte was going to take all of it, I guess, but they didn't want the liability. I think legally there was an issue with that. So they only took piece offices. Like they took California, Chicago, Texas. I can't remember all of them, but oh boy, that was so crazy.
And I think they only took tax. They did not take any audit. So that's my recollection.
Maybe you're right.
That's my recollection.
Would there have been that many people in tax in Illinois then?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then Deloitte probably had that many, a lot of people. But I was just, I could not believe how big those offices were.
Yeah.
I mean, the Natural History Museum, they rented out the entire museum for the party.
With Sue the T-Rex.
Right. I mean, it was like
Sue.
The whole museum was just that party for that group.
Yeah. I mean,
it was crazy.
When I was at Anderson, they'd rent out Great America.
Okay.
I was like, that means something to like me and you, but everyone's like,
the amusement park.
There's like Elitch's downtown Denver. That's tiny. That's no big deal. KPMG did the same thing.
It's I don't know if it's still owned by Six Flags, but it was, Six Flags, Great America. And, it's like, huge, right? I mean, not like Disney World huge, but huge.
Yeah.
And they'd rent it out. That was, one of the things that we would do for fun.
Yeah. Right. Little treats to the staff. You get to do a lot of neat things that they would do to kind of make up for all the hours they kill you doing for a living.
Yeah, right. But so I was at KPMG for 3 years.
Okay. In
Portland,
Oregon. Okay. Oh, in Portland. Okay. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and so I didn't work on a lot of Washington at that time. We had, groups, a group of people in Seattle that was really kind of their expertise. Yeah. And so I was really kind of more of an income tax person working on, just multi-state compliance and, consulting work, not a lot of sales tax even at that time, although I was getting a little bit more exposure to it. I would say that probably the biggest, kind of shift in my career was when Kim Snyder, who was the multi-state tax services partner in Seattle, he contacted me when I was still at KPMG and asked me if I would have dinner with him because he was looking to hire somebody to rejuvenate, I would say, the practice in Portland for Deloitte.
Okay.
And he found me and asked me to, go to dinner, hear about Deloitte, hear about what, I could contribute. And next thing I knew, I was signing my offer letter to, join Deloitte.
And I remember Kim Snyder was a federal guy who became in charge of the state and local practice. And because I went to your office before you were there when I was part of the national team. And I remember being a little bit annoyed, I won't lie, because I was like, he's not even a multi-state guy. Like his bread and butter was, becoming a federal person and understanding that and the nuances, of course. But I was like, I was purely state and local. So I had a little bit of resentment, I suppose, because I'm like, this is all I know. I know federal a little bit. I did federal for a couple of years, but like I really was ingrained in state and local. And yet he was a leader with a stronger federal background than a state and local background, but he was still the market leader in SALT. So it's interesting.
Fast forward. And then Stacey showed up.
Yeah, right. Because he probably needed some of those strengths in the technical area that he was lacking.
Yeah. So the guys that had been in the Portland office before I joined were really very heavy business and occupation tax guys. That was their technical kind of background. Even though they were sitting in Portland, that was most of their work.
Okay.
And they just weren't really, I guess, making inroads with the, federal tax team because they just didn't know income tax, right? I mean, if anybody knows Washington B&O, right? It's pretty intricate, right? It's there's a lot of different rules and you can make a career out of it. You really can.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what those guys did.
Right. And especially at the larger companies of the world, like smaller mid-market, they're not paying enough to really spend a whole lot of time fighting over a couple $1,000s of tax. But when you're talking something larger, you're probably talking millions of dollars with the tax.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So.
So Kim really needed somebody who could make the inroads with the federal tax people and kind of build that practice. And so I took a leap of faith and said, okay, I'm going to try it. Right. I mean, what do I have to lose? Right. And I was a manager. And so here I was kind of joining this practice. I didn't know any of them. I don't even know if I'd seen them out in the market. Right. Because they were all federal tax people. And if I'd seen anybody else out in the market, it would have been like an EY multi-state person or something like that, right? It wouldn't have been, a federal person necessarily. The other thing was that office had kind of had a shift in leadership where there were a couple partners that were retiring or had retired. And so there was just kind of a leadership change and younger partners coming up. So really the timing was really good for me to come in because it was, they were really looking to build and kind of change, that office and attract younger talent and things like that. And so it was really a good time for me to be there and learn. And it was also, I joined, I think in 2005. And then, as you guys know, Fin 48 hit, a few years later. And that I was the busiest I've ever been that year because everybody was having to book reserves and, we had publicly held companies that were, having to figure out their Nexus footprint, get everything booked.
Their exposures for a long time.
Yeah. And so I was never busier and I'm sure you guys weren't either, but you know what I mean? It was a very busy time for us. And also, but probably for me, one of the better times in my career, honestly, because I just learned a lot. I was constantly, helping clients, which is really what I love to do. Figure things out and help them book things that they need to book, help them figure out their exposure, help them figure out what to do to fix it. And so that was a really interesting time for me. And then I was able to hire people too, which was, I loved it, right? I was, I had a lot of support from leadership and I was able then to build a team and we had a great time. We enjoy, we worked hard, but we also had a good time.
Yeah.
And I really, really loved that office. And I really loved the leadership team. I ultimately reported up to Seattle and then down to San Jose. And I loved my whole leadership team in that Pacific Northwest. They were so incredibly supportive. And I had Walker when I was there too, which I would have to say that Kim was probably, he was one of my biggest supporters as far as, what do you want to do when you come back? Do you want to come back?
I know, right?
This is your first baby.
That's always a conversation. Why is that always a conversation? It's an assumption that all us women in careers would quit.
Well, I think I didn't really get that impression from him. Honestly, It was more like, you got to think about it. What is it that you want?
Yeah.
And then I remember kind of having the conversation with him. I'd gone up to Seattle. I was pregnant. I used to spend a ton of time in Seattle. I'd go back and forth between Portland and Seattle a lot. I remember kind of sitting in his office and him being like, okay, what do you think? And I said, well, what if I went part-time? And he goes, well, don't forget, part-time means part-time pay and part-time benefits. Why don't you just think about working from home a couple days a week? Which was unprecedented.
Right. Not done. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Now we're there, but we were not there.
Oh no, because Walker was born in 2006.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the black suit, pay to wear jeans on Friday when I got started.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Pantyhose were still part of the dress code.
Oh, yeah. I remember going to the Arizona office, traveling Arizona of all places in the summer, and I could not wear sandals. In Denver, we wore sandals. They're like, you're wearing open-toed shoes. I'm like, we're actually having this conversation about the fact that I'm wearing open-toed shoes.
It's 197 degrees outside.
Right. And it was like summer 2005, 2006. I mean, this is not that long ago. And we were still talking about open-toed shoes and what proper attire was for women in the office. Yeah. So that somebody would say that and allow that and be thoughtful of that. Mm-hmm. I always felt, I don't know about you, but I always felt like the women who chose to go part-time did not get a good deal because the work is not part-time. So you would still be at the beck and call of a client. Things are needed. You can't just take the day off if you have to work and answer a question. The client is expecting an answer. They don't know that you're off on Wednesdays. So I was like, why would you do it? Just figure out a way to work around and not take the pay cut because you're not going to have the time cut.
The time isn't going to be representative of the money.
That's what my perception always was. So I thought, take the money and, just figure out a way to work around your life and still be productive in the full-time area, just maybe not in the normal construct of a 9 to 5, right? Because that's not maybe how children work. So,
what do you mean? As we're all from home with our kids running around and potentially going on and off mute because of yelling or need.
Zoe's sleeping still because it's no school this week. So she's, we had a rousing game of croquet last night and then she went, nice. I'm like, I have to go to bed. I did win, by the way.
Nice.
You had Walker in Portland and then eventually you end up in Denver. Was it a really hard transition if you felt so connected to your team? And I know that's, when you spend, and that was something, because I did a lot of recruiting at KPMG, it's so much about the team and who you surround yourself with because they become your family. There's a lot of big four marriages. It's an integral part of your life. Oh yeah. And so is it really hard for you to kind of let go of that team and transition to Denver?
Yeah, I cried a lot. Yeah, I mean, I was super invested, right? As you can imagine, right? Because I'd hired these people, they were looking to me to, lead them. And then I, was really invested with, all the other partners. And like I said, I mean, I felt like, some of the best support in my career at that time, right? And I'd already been, in my career for, 10 years at that point, right? Maybe over. And so it was just, I just kind of felt like I was in some ways a little bit home, right? When I was there. Yeah. But then,
you love Portland. I mean, it's such a great city.
Yeah. I miss it still to this day, honestly. Yeah. And I mean, I could never get that back, right? All of that I had there, of course, but meaning, just the team, the people, all of that.
People have kind of found different ways.
Oh yeah.
In their careers.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention your SALTovation team now will never be topped, right?
Well, absolutely.
But you could live in Oregon if you wanted to, just saying.
And you never know. I might end up, back out there eventually.
Well, but then would you have, so you transferred with Deloitte to Denver and then you and Judy, were you at Deloitte at the same time?
Yeah. But she was in Portland when we met on the phone. We never, I mean, we didn't have this. I don't even think I knew what you looked like unless I looked at our picture thing.
Not. Yeah.
We just talked on the phone and we were trying to get some clients and lots of great conversations because, her trying to understand what I was trying to do, vice versa, me trying to understand her client so I can give bids because I have to figure out what the heck it's going to cost for the client and see if it's a fit.
Judy, were you doing the sales tax outsourcing?
Yep.
And so
I was part of the whole outsourcing practice at Deloitte where we took over tax departments. One byproduct was sales tax, part of it was property tax, part of it was income tax, the whole suite. So it just depended on what the client needed and we would slice and dice accordingly. And so that's what we were trying to do was sort of kind of what we do now, honestly, but on a larger scale, because a lot of those companies, right, couldn't necessarily justify the resources, nor do they have the expertise. I mean, the resources it costs to have a group, like software, technology. I mean, that's an infrastructure cost you just have to absorb if you're going to have your own tax department. So if you can get somebody else who's top of mind, paying attention, working with people who have it, sometimes it doesn't make so much sense to be an in-house person. You may be able to attest to that at Ball. Like, how much does it cost to support all the technical resources you had at the Big Four? There's a lot that really is at your fingertips that you would have to replace in industry.
Oh, yeah.
You can't just Google it all.
Yeah. I mean, so I got to know Judy there. And then when I was going to be moving to Denver, I contacted her because, I had Walker and I need a daycare. So I contacted her, like, where do I start? And so she gave me some ideas. And then when I, came to house hunt and daycare hunt and all of that, then, settled on a place and, here we are, right?
Well, we had offices next to each other.
We did. Yeah.
But
briefly.
With what? Yeah.
Briefly. Yeah. Until you then moved on. Yeah. So I worked in this office here at Deloitte until 2011. And then that's when I went to Ball, which that job also fell in my lap.
When did you come to Colorado though? What year was it?
2008.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I think I left Deloitte in 2009. No, I did leave in 2008. I left in 2008. So we were very short because I had Zoe in 2007 and then 2008 is when I left.
Yeah, because I remember I'd run into you in the halls, right? And we'd chit chat for, a period of time and then you'd be off, doing the next thing. Well, because you were traveling a lot,
you
was rarely
I was
in the
back
office.
and forth to Boston at that point, and that's what ultimately led to my deciding to leave. Because in order for mine to make the numbers and do what I wanted to do and advance myself, I was going back and forth to bigger markets to have the bigger book of business. And I had just had Zoe, and I'm like, I didn't have a kid, never to see her, and I could bring her out on the weekends, but my husband would come out on the weekend. It just was not tenable. I just didn't want, at that point in my life, I didn't want to be a road warrior anymore.
Well, then Stacey, so, at that point, you're kind of in your fourth market in Denver. You left, you went to Ball, and then you ended up going back into kind of public accounting with a smaller firm, and then ended up, at Tax Ops. What do you think? Because I always find you to be very relatable and very good with clients.
And just
able to just listen and hear them and let them feel like you're being heard. So how have you, in changing those kind of markets, how do you stay grounded and connected to your clients? What is it that really kind of drives you to be, a great practitioner outside of your incredible, technical abilities?
I do think one of the things that I do try to do is have empathy for our clients, right? No matter who they are, right? And just like you said, I do try to listen. I think, as I was kind of reflecting on some of the things that I think have made me relatable over time, I think it is that I do listen, I do care, and not everybody does that, right? There's we know a lot of practitioners that just say, this is what you need to do. Here's your report. Good luck, right? Where we don't treat them like that. And I think early on in my career, maybe not so much when I was in Anderson in Chicago, because this was, it was so huge and I was young, but I do feel over time, and we do this now, and I think I've done it, as I was getting further on in my career early on, I have wanted to be their state tax department, right? And there was a client that I had in Portland in particular. He was a tough cookie. And he had been a long-standing client of the firm. And then here I come in, fresh set of eyes looking at their state income tax returns. He prepared them in-house. He wasn't necessarily doing them, but his team was. But he ultimately signed off on them. We signed as prepared. Well, we were the reviewer. We signed the returns. Deloitte did. But we reviewed and signed. They'd been prepared a certain way for years and years and years. And here I come with a little bit more state income tax expertise than my brethren, at Deloitte had. And I found all these issues some favorable, some not. And I remember sitting in his office, and he was a tough cookie. He wasn't, difficult per se. He was just a quiet individual, I would say. He was someone who took in information. He was a processor. So he didn't say a lot, right? And I just remember sitting with him, going over all of my notes and letting him process. And it was kind of awkward because I'm sitting there, there's silence. He's just processing. He doesn't really know me. He doesn't, we hadn't really gotten to that level of trust yet because this was all new. And I remember him getting upset, rightly so, with, the partner on the engagement because, he's hearing about these things for the first time. Mm-hmm. Why am I hearing this now? And here I am having to explain who I am, my expertise, without throwing somebody else under the bus. A little bit of a fine line. All of us have been there, one time or another. But I just remember he and I created a really good working relationship. And I think it was because I was able to let him be him and process that information, kind of read him and let him process it, get comfortable with it. And then I was able to earn that trust. And then I became, me and my team, their state tax department. And I worked on so many projects for that company, and they were a rail car manufacturer, so kind of old school, right? And
but also really interesting issues.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah, and then that was also Fin 48. They had a leasing company. They leased rail cars. Oh yeah, and like mobile. Very interesting issues, right? This is all mobile equipment running through. Do you have Nexus? Do you not? What do you need to do about it? Multiple.
What's your miles in state, or your, where's all your stuff stored?
Yeah. Do you have flash title in places? Just lots of different really interesting issues. And so I was able to really help them. And we created a really good relationship. Like I said,
and
it was very awkward
and
at
you
first.
didn't lose the client. That's important too, because you don't want to throw the other person under the bus, but what they're trying to say is, hey, this person knows even more strategically on these areas. Let's give it a shot to take a look. And you did find problems, which meant kind of ill on the signers, right? And you were able to get through that. That's incredibly positive.
Yeah.
You're that glass of milk that you just dipped that tough cookie in slowly over time.
And it got all soggy.
Soft.
Right.
Not soggy.
Softer.
Edible.
Softer, gotcha. Yeah. Yes.
We made cookies over the weekend, so there's like lots of
Zoe
cookie
did
talk
too,
in our
and
house.
she did the whole dipping. I'm like, I don't dip my cookies.
I thought about making cookies, and I didn't.
See? Well,
and I just think it's funny how some people are dippers and some people aren't. I am not a dipper, but she's a dipper.
I'm not either. These are important things. Are you a dipper or not?
Yeah.
But when it comes to your work style, Stace, you are that necessary glass of milk if you need to dip that in that tough cookie.
Yeah. That's good. That's why I brought you in. I thought you were good for that. Like getting through those
the dipper.
issues.
I'm the dipper.
You
listen, you're a good mediator. I think you take people into account. You bring a different context that other people may not think. And it gives a more well-rounded view of the relationship with the client. And then really in the end, I think the clients see that you really care about them in addition to the work. And I think they really build that trust with you, and I think that's really important as a service provider.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know if I intentionally ever really did it that way. It just has, or thought about it, I guess. Right. I just think that just from human nature, people want to be heard and they should be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And
just part of your nature is a genuine kind of like caring soul. And that carries over. Just because we're in a business setting doesn't mean that you have to stop treating people like people. Right. It's like, we're not changing the world. We're not, teaching our youth. Yes, we do taxes, but at the end of the day, like, it's about helping people, and everyone's got a need. And how can we best suit to help your need and work you through things? Especially, often, especially in the last couple of weeks, we've come into companies and said, hey, by the way, you're $1 million in arrears.
Yeah.
Like, you are not compliant by like $1 million.
Yeah, it's very stressful for us too.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what it's like for them because it's not our money. Yeah, no,
Right.
we're like, oh, we think this is pretty good considering, but you know, because it's only 10 states instead of all 46 or whatever, or 50.
Right.
But then they're like,
right. Yeah. Meanwhile, their head's spinning. Right. No, I know.
Like it could have been worse.
Right.
It's like, what do you mean it could have been worse? It's $1 million.
Right.
Well, so then who do you, throughout kind of your career, and maybe, you know, you've touched on this, but who would you say has been the most influential person in your career? Or is there not like one?
I would say there's been like I don't know, you know, I feel like it's been different people over time. Right. You know, like I said, the one partner that I walked into his office,
the red line,
with his red pen ready at the ready. I mean, while that was incredibly annoying, I learned a lot, right? Because words matter, right? And I would agonize over these memos and, you know, private letter rulings that we would write. I mean, I'd hours and hours of agonizing because we all know the words matter. And then when I'd go in and he'd, you know, start redlining, and then sometimes I disagree with him. And so I think, you know, he and I carved a pretty good relationship, right? Because I'd walk in and he'd be like talking to me about an issue, right? To be like, because I like writing and I'm like, words matter, right? And so like, he would be like, well, what do you think this should say? We got to that kind of understanding.
Right, so there's a respect.
Yeah.
Well, he probably saw in you that thing, whatever that is for him, that was like, she's good, I'm going to invest in her. And that's, I think, how we feel about a lot of people. Like, I hire people that I want to invest in. Like, I feel that there's this thing that I see there that, you know, I know you're going to be really good and I can trust you to execute. Like, that's important. Like, if I am the one who's creating the work and helping people get through it, I can't do all of it by myself. I need good people that care and do a great job.
Well, and Judy, that's what you've always said is people matter.
Yeah.
Like whether it's our clients, our staff, you know, and just, you know, life outside of work and tax and whatnot, that people matter. And it's true.
And they're paying us and they're giving us a living, but we also want to help them, right? I mean, we also have something to share that is so deep and intrinsic and not known commonly. Like, we can really provide a lot of advice and counsel to them, but we also have to be patient with their ability to intake us. So that is a really powerful thing, Stacey, that you kind of won that practitioner over.
Well, and I might have had a little bit of an in, honestly, because so when I took the job at Anderson, I had no idea who the practice leader for the Chicago office was. Turns out he was the brother to my algebra teacher. And if you think about that, like, put your head around that, right? Because
you grew up in a town of 700 people?
Correct. And he grew up in a town of about that number of people too, of neighboring town. And I didn't know that until like he actually pulled me aside and he's like, "You're from Bradford." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Do you know who my brother is?" And I'm like, looking at him and I'm like, "Oh my God." I'm like, Bob Sash, Steve Sash. So Bob Sash was the partner in charge. And his brother, Steve, was my algebra teacher in high school. Mm-hmm.
And see, there's that affinity of common heritage or whatever, that connection that we have as people that forms a lot of things.
Well, and I think, you know, Bob had lived in Chicago for years, right? And I think he was like, "Hey, here's somebody who's like from, you know, my, you know, neck of the woods." And he'd like have me come into his office. I remember he got an aerial of the farm that he grew up on, right? Like, that's a big thing, right? With farm communities, right? You get an aerial picture of the farm, right? And so he brought me into his office to show me the aerial. And then like, I'd walk out of his office and everybody would be looking at me like, "Why were you in there?" Like,
we're just talking about life on the farm. What are you talking about?
I'm like, "He's showing me the aerial." They're like, "What? Why?
What's an aerial?
Why do you even know that?" Right? So, yeah. So, I mean, like, so we had some commonalities, which I think was like refreshing to him in some ways. And then, but he also got to know me, right? And my work style and, you know, kind of what I could offer. But then I think to the other partners, you know, they came, I never used that to my advantage by any stretch, right? Because it's not like, I mean, Bob was my boss, right? Ultimately my boss.
But you don't
But
have
it's the
to.
partners.
People, you already have that affinity from him, and he's going to connect with you, and then everybody else is going to see it and go, she knows a way into the king. Because he
I
likes
didn't
her.
look at it that way. Well, and I didn't look at it like that, but like I'm sure it didn't hurt, in some ways.
Right, because you could have a more informal relationship with him in addition to the formality, and you have more common history. So there's that connection that you have about living in a farming community.
Yeah.
Well, so then, Stace, as we kind of wrap this up, share one thing about yourself that we don't know about you.
Oh, this might be a surprise. I geek out on the NCAA March Madness.
Really?
Huge geek out. Love it. Do multiple brackets, totally into it. I mean, like weirdly into it.
I don't think I definitely
like I could see you playing basketball.
Oh, right. Yeah. Like I've never played basketball in my life. I love March Madness. Like I love all the energy. I love everything about it. I'm usually rooting for the underdogs, even though like in my brackets, they're not winning. I mean, you know what I mean? Like I'm totally into it.
Well, so then how often do you get the 12-5?
What do you mean?
You know how like every year there's a 12-5 upset in the first round?
Yeah. No, I don't normally have that upset. It's kind of funny. Like I should.
So you love it, but are you bad at it then?
No, I've won some pools over time. But that's probably because I put in like 10 brackets.
One of these is bound to win. I picked on mascots.
Totally.
I picked random.
Totally.
Picked all the underdogs at some point. Because you're going to have that one upset that just breaks everyone's bracket.
Right.
So do you pick based on strategery, or do you pick based on I want to pick the underdog? Okay.
No. I mean, it's funny because I don't normally pick the underdog, but like when I'm watching the games, I'm totally rooting for the underdog, right?
Yeah.
That's funny because I did that way in the beginning of my staff years and I won. And one of the directors, he was really mad because it was sort of my first time, but I got advice. Like I figured out how to pick the seeded and then I picked it and I won fair and square. And I don't think he liked that very much.
Probably not.
It's the people who take it really seriously, my husband being one of them, just get like super upset when like the people who are like really have no business, right? Like he gets so mad at his fantasy where he's like, I am strategic, but I'm doing terrible. Cause it's like, okay, bro, part of it's like luck, right? Like you never know, like, or especially now it's like
something in that game that brings the underdog in. I mean, that does happen. We've watched all those movies, people.
Starting receiver has COVID. Like, so that kind of helps. So our last thing, and this wasn't so rapid as we did it with Alex, so maybe we'll try again, but we're going to do some rapid response questions that are just silly, fun, and just another way of, having people get to know you. So you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be. I don't know what's coming. So like, I don't know. All right.
What are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm not. I'm watching.
Okay, fine. What are you watching?
The Crown.
Are you? All
right.
That's
so
next
good
on my list.
And so so I'm not normally like a sit around and do nothing type of person, but full disclosure, Saturday, I watched the whole first season of The Crown on my butt, on my sofa, ordered food. Like that's what I did. So like, what did I do without my kids? That.
Nice.
Awesome. Are they hour long or 20 minutes long?
Hour. Okay. I mean, so it's Netflix, so there's no commercials, right? You were like in the zone.
You're committed. Yeah.
Right. What do you listen to in the car?
Oh, XM radio. I listen to usually Alt Nation. All the new like alternative music.
What's your favorite movie?
Silence of the Lambs.
Really?
What?
All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And my favorite book, honestly.
Interesting.
I know.
All right.
Like, wonder what that says about me.
Yes. Just say it.
We'll unpack that in a follow-up.
Right. Should we do a round 2?
Maybe. All right. 3 words or phrases that Lot would use to describe you.
A lot. Oh, that's unpredictable. But I would say fun, I hope. Loving. Caring.
All right. What is one thing you've learned during stay at home?
I would say to appreciate the little things. I try to get out to take like a walk. I mean, you guys kind of know that. I try to get out and take a walk. It's getting colder, right? So it's not happening quite as much, but I really like being outside, and I've gotten to enjoy it a lot more since we've been home.
What is your favorite thing to do with each one of your kids?
Well, we're big Disney World fans, as you guys know, or Walt Disney. We've been both parks, I guess, in the US. I would say going on a roller coaster with Lot is one of my favorite things to do with him. He loves roller coasters, and just to see his face and just how the pure joy on his face. Walker, I would say, is actually just taking a walk with the dogs. He and I have some quality time walking the dogs usually, and we just talk about whatever he wants to talk about. Sports, whatever. He loves baseball, as you guys know. And so we talk a lot about baseball and, kind of what he wants to do with that, because he's, currently trying to get on a travel team. So we'll see if he ends up getting on a team, but we spend some time. It's just, I think, our time to, just talk about, what's going on in each other's lives, because he's 14. So it's a different relationship, right?
Yeah.
And a different stage.
Which one of your animals is your favorite?
Oh, that's not fair.
I'm kidding. The new puppy, because it's the cutest and cuddliest.
Yeah, except for he's a puppy. And I'm like,
No, right.
need my head examined for doing this, everybody. And I'm cleaning up after him all the time, and I'm getting up in the middle of the night. So maybe not him. Maybe eventually. I would say it's funny because I have dogs and cats, but I would say my cat, Tom, he's my buddy. He sits he's not right next to me now, but he usually sits next to me when I'm working and sleeps with me at night. He's like my buddy. He's like my
Did he watch The Crown with you?
He did. Part of it. They all did, though, really. I mean, but the dogs didn't really. I mean, they were cashed out, right? It was hours. There's 10 episodes in the first season. Maybe every season. I don't know. 10. Think about that, people.
Uh-huh.
How much I sat on my sofa.
All right.
That's fine. I'm jealous. Let's be honest.
Thank gosh for Netflix, though. Honestly, with this COVID thing, I'm like, it is like a saving grace to have something fun to look forward to and get into some of these series, I think.
Yeah.
For sure.
So,
all right, Stace. Well, thank you so much for being here today, for being part of the team, and for being you. You are the newest member, but a tremendous member and team. And I just love the opportunity that I get to, connect with you and spend time with you. So thank you for, taking the risk and joining the team.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was, to me, honestly, I feel blessed to be here, just so that you guys know, but also I had several friends ask me, once I made the transition, how's it going? Is it, how does it feel different? And I'm like, no, because for the most part, I've worked with everybody before. Mary, I know you and I haven't worked together before, but I feel like it's just been an easy, transition, and it feels very comfortable and just being home, right? I do consider you all my family, and, it takes a village, right? and we are that village. So,
That's right.
So we need each other as much as, anybody else.
True.
So I feel very blessed to be here, and I love working with you all. So thank you for hiring me, for entrusting me, and, letting me do my thing and be a part of it.
Well, this has been another episode of SALTovation. I'm Meredith Smith. Until next time. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended, nor should it be relied upon as legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. You should consult with a competent professional to discuss specifics of your situation and the applicability of the information presented.